Welcome to another great Pay It webinar. The title of today's webinar is called The Efficiency Playbook, Practical Strategies That Actually Work. My name is Jack Laskowitz. I'm a vice president here at Pay It. I'm thrilled to be joined by three incredible leaders from various backgrounds in local government. And today we're going to be talking about efficiency. If we think about the topic of efficiency or even the definition of efficiency, at its base layer, it's really just getting the most output for the least amount of input. Some would call that doing more with less. While I'd say that the term government efficiency has probably made a lot more headlines in the last 6 months than it has in the last 6 years. But I would also argue that, for generations, leaders in government have been trying to do more with less day of the week. And today, our mission is the reason we call this a playbook, our mission is to talk through ways in which we've tackled identifying opportunities for efficiency or where we have strengths in efficiency, how to get those things championed, what to do to get the momentum and the movement going to tackle some of these initiatives and really getting the work done and realizing those results. So my hope is today that whether you've got decades of experience as a government leader or this is your first day, you can walk away with 1, 2, 3 things that you can go try back in your space, in your domain, or you will affirm some of the things that you hear today. They're like, we're doing some of that too, and we're on the right track. But without further ado, I want to introduce our panelists. Treasurer Chelsea Miller from Columbia, Missouri, Treasurer and Trustee Kim Archuleta from Pueblo County, Colorado, Dr. Shelley Knieven from Wyandotte County and Kansas City, Kansas Unified Government. Ladies, I'll let you do a more full introduction of yourselves first. So just, again, who are you? What's a day-to-day look like for you? What's your domain? And, when you hear the term efficiency, what does that mean to you? Chelsea, the first one on my line of video. So Chelsea Miller, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Jack. Hey, everyone. My name is Chelsea Miller, and I serve as the city treasurer for Columbia, Missouri. Wheelhouse, my day-to-day responsibilities include overall city cash management. So that could be anything and everything from cash position, reporting, forecasting. I oversee deposits and disbursements for the city or even investments. My seat at the city was empty for a couple of years before me, and Treasury wasn't very well defined. So efficiency to me was just defining that. And I've got a nice long runway of challenging the status quo and offering some fresh perspective.
Cool. Thank you, Chelsea. Glad to have you. I'm going to just work my way west. So Dr. Shelley Knieven in Wyandotte County, Kansas City, and Kansas City, Kansas. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is Dr. Shelley Knieven, and I am currently the CFO for the Unified Government, which is a consolidated government of Kansas City, Kansas, a city with the county government, Wyandotte County. And like Chelsea said, I have all those responsibilities as well as economic development in terms of managing the back end of once we get a company that's going to come here and build here and we're giving financial incentives, people have to administer those incentives for 20 to 25 years. So our staff gets involved in that. And I'm also in charge of all of our debt management, involved with our budget team, as well as just generally various projects that occur throughout the community. So glad to be here.
Thrilled to have you. And finally, we will finish with Treasurer and Trustee Kim Archuleta.
Thank you so much for allowing me to be a guest speaker with this panel. Super excited for this. So my name is Kim Archuleta. As Jack stated, I am the Pueblo County Treasurer and Public Trustee in Pueblo, Colorado. And my role basically as treasurer is to collect and disperse property taxes. So of course, we disperse those property taxes to lots of taxing entities and authorities, such as water districts, library districts, school districts, fire districts, and that's basically how a lot of those taxing entities get funded. And so that is my role as treasurer. I am serving my first 4-year term. And I never in a million years saw myself in public service. But yet here I am serving my community daily. And I absolutely love my job and I love what I do.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kim. I appreciate having all three of you on. I think we were talking before our session, even as we prepared for this, and I think just the backgrounds and the different perspectives is going to have a great conversation today. So let's get into the topics. We're going to go from, like we talked before, from identifying those opportunities to getting those things championed to actually getting the work done. I want to start with identifying areas for potential improvement. Really efficiency is just a measure, right? Things are more or less efficient than each other. You don't sort of achieve efficiency. But Shelley, we'll start with you. Where do you look for opportunities for improvement? You've served in counties and cities and higher education, now at the unified government. When you come into a role, or when you're in a role for a long time, where do you look for opportunities for improvement?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have, there's a lot of different strategies to employ, particularly when you're new to an organization. I've been at the unified government about a year and a half and have worked always in the Kansas City area for about 30 years with local government being the primary, and then about 10 years in different higher ed areas, and kind of have a niche for finding financially struggling organizations. So that provides in itself a lot of opportunity. I listen to the elected officials, to the staff, and what their concerns are, what their issues are, what the impediments are. And I think probably the best lesson that I've learned is that it's like you're coming up to a stream, and when you enter the water, you have to remember that the stream was going before you. Your experience is happening from that moment forward, but there's an awful lot that's occurred before you, and getting an understanding of that and why we are where we are helps to not recreate solutions, or B, if solutions were tried, to revisit them. I've found that sometimes organizations will just accept a status quo because, and I know we've all heard this, because that's the way we've done it, but it's really because they don't either know that there's a different way, or they don't think maybe a system can do something a different way. And it's always just asking questions and partnering with your staff to try and make their jobs go a little bit easier so they can do their job and provide the outcomes.
Shelley, you were saying something to me the other day that I thought was also really impactful, in that you would go through the same process that your constituents would go through. You went to an office and I think paid a tax bill. Talk me through how that also sort of exposed you to, opportunities or strengths in terms of efficiencies.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the state of Kansas, the treasurer's office, which is part of the area I work in, they do the division of motor vehicles for the state. And of course, as we know, all people love to go to the DMV and spend their day there. It's definitely an area we are challenged with customer services. And we're in fact undergoing a review right now to try and figure out how we can use our resources and maybe better organize ourselves with line management, pre-appointment management. We have all these things, but I'm not sure we're really managing them the best. And so in order to have a perspective, I had really two examples, Jack, when you said that. One was a constituent needed to get some help doing what we call a Dropbox. And so I wanted to go with them to see how well that process worked. And I walked him over to the courthouse, and I immediately saw just really basic things that could be changed to make that process better. For example, it's a Dropbox, and yet there were no envelopes for people to put their information in to put it in the box. And I was like, it's sometimes it's the very most simple things. There were no checklist, so that they didn't need to talk to employees. They could just look and see, did I have all the right information? Do I have all of it here? And then we have a residency requirement, so I moved over here. And I also then had to transfer my car tags. And so I went through the process. I was really pretty new. And so the employees at the front counter did not know who I was. And I had a really good experience in that case. But I will definitely say that I see a lot of areas for improvement. There were families sitting there with little kids trying to contain their little kids, nothing for them to be able to do, just color sheets, little things like that, like you see at a dentist's office or doctor's office, that we should try to just see what we could do to make it a better experience. So that's just, one example of things that I've done, because I think you can always look from the outside in, but until you really experience it, I don't think you really understand what it is that you're getting feedback on from the citizens. And so there's a little bit of a natural tendency, I think, to be defensive, that, we're doing the best we can. We've got limited resources. And when you become so immersed in the day to day responsibilities, I think what happens is that you lose sight of maybe some really obvious things that are low lying fruit that you can actually implement very quickly.
Hmm. Yeah, and it really resonated with me to whether we've been in the same role for 10 years or 10 days, to just find those times to just look
Be a
at it.
citizen. Mhm.
Yeah, let's look at it through the eyes of the individuals that you serve.
Absolutely.
That was great. Chelsea Miller, I want to go over to you. Additional comments, and then if you have any thoughts, where do you, the inverse, like where do you find things that are really efficient that could have maybe some building blocks that you could apply elsewhere?
I love Shelley's story about being a citizen and going through that process. That's great. To me, I mean, to go back to the original question of where do you find things, the analogy that I was taught was it's kind of like a well-maintained car. When it's working, it's got little to no input or manual intervention. And then opportunities are either in the form of noise, like a noisy car, things that are complaints from staff. I took those to heart and tried to capture those. Money, because I had a lot of visibility to citywide department deposits and disbursements instead of just one individual department. I could see, hey, what's our move the needle things to go after. And then unsightliness. Shelley was talking about the envelopes. So things that are right there in your face that are maybe blatantly missing, but you're never really done. You should always go back through and kind of reverse engineer. So those logs I still look at after a couple of years. I look through and did we move it as far as we needed to, and what's new and how far behind are we? So we chase those and keep chasing them.
That's great. So it's a nice mix of qualitative data in your logs,
Right.
and the sort of the measurable inputs and outputs, but then it's also the observational qualitative data. Do we have envelopes? Is there a checklist? Sometimes small things can have big impacts when we look at efficiencies. It doesn't necessarily always need to be really complicated. Super.
Yeah, and you use that extra time, right? You have bought and given yourself back some of that time. When you're more efficient, you have extra time to spend in some of those harder to reach or a little higher hanging fruit.
Yep. Yep. So if I can double click on that, how do we, like, when you prioritize, there's always going to be 100 things that we could make more efficient. Where do you go? Like, how do you prioritize that when you identify them? And it might be a good lead-in question for Kim here on topic 2.
Yeah, that's personally, I'm a champion of the Covey quadrant of importance, but I check my list with others because you'd be surprised how many times you think something is really important and you're totally bought in, and then another person has their perspective on it. And if you get all the way to the end and the finish line and you're like, look what I did this thing, but it conflicts with their version of success or importance, then you're in trouble and you're trying to sell instead of you're all swimming towards the same goal.
And for our friends at home, the Covey quadrants of importance, can I pop quiz you on what
Yeah.
those are?
Oh man. Yeah. So I don't do the traditional ones anymore, but there's 4 quadrants and it's alternating between urgency and importance. And so we could do a whole other session on that, I think,
Yeah.
one day, but it's in our nature to revert to the really small, not important things that aren't urgent. And those are the time suckers. And you got to fight to stay and keep those really important things, even if they're not urgent, at the top of your to-do list each day, because those are the things that on the noisy car, they're making a lot of noise, and you got to win some of those for your staff and for your citizens.
Yeah. Yeah. The tyranny of the urgent. I think we all battle that
Yeah.
every day at home and work, frankly.
Right.
Cool. Chelsea, thank you. We'll come back to you here in a minute. I want to turn over to Kim. And it's okay. So we've identified opportunities for efficiency. We've either talked to staff, we've observed things, we've measured opportunities. Now we got to go rally the interest, right? So I haven't seen someone that says I can get everything done with no help from anyone else in my jurisdiction. Someone needs to point that out to me in the show notes if they can. So Kim, how do you rally interest and change? Like, so walk us through getting those team members in your experience.
Absolutely. So I really loved what the other two ladies had to say, the analogies of the car, and this is the way it's always been done. I think we all deal with those struggles. And for me, I feel like I sort of had an advantage going into my position because I worked in the treasurer's office 4 years prior to becoming treasurer. So I had 4 years to identify all of the things that needed to change. And I assure you, I started right at about the 3-month mark. I was like, oh, this can change, this can change, this can change. And so when I took office, it was sort of relatively easy for me to identify it. I had already identified that. But as far as, when I ran for treasurer, my entire platform was centered around change. My campaign slogan was a new generation of leadership. And I meant that in every sense, not just age or experience, but in mindset. The office was extremely outdated. Processes were manual, redundant, and frankly, inefficient. For example, we did not even have cash counters at teller windows. Okay, this is a treasurer's office that deals with thousands and thousands of dollars in cash, and we didn't even have cash counters. Tellers were made to count manually and sometimes even pull another teller from the line to verify the count. And so we weren't even accepting credit card payments in the office. I took office in 2023, and we still were not accepting credit card payments in the office. And I mean, you go to little, weekend vendors that have at least a square where they can swipe a card. And so what that told me everything I needed to know. Change wasn't an option. It was, quite frankly, long overdue. And so I think the key to just really rallying and get everybody on board, because I think people fear the unknown, right? Going back to this is the way it's always been done. And because that's all they know, they fear a change in process. And so I think it's just really making it a collaborative effort and not a disruptive effort. So when it came to getting my staff on board, I really just took that team approach. Since they were the ones doing the work day in and day out, I wanted their input. I would say, what about this? Or I'm thinking about this. What are your thoughts? So I think instead of just, putting the hammer down and playing, leader and saying, nope, this is what we're doing, take it or leave it type thing, I really wanted that collaborative approach. And I absolutely valued their input. And so I think once everybody gets past that fear of the unknown, that fear then becomes excitement. And so then once they're excited about it, they're not as resistant to that change. I didn't want to push those changes. Once again, I really wanted them to embrace them and be excited about them. And I think, once again, just really involving your leadership team is just a key part in that change, in getting them on board. And I'll be honest with you, I still struggle with that today. I have, some employees that truly fear change. And, when I recommend a possible solution, they seem to always have a problem for every solution. Well, what if this? Well, what if this happens? And what if this happens? And so it's really just trying to change their mindset. And it's like, okay, well, what if it does work? And what if it does do this? And it creates that efficiency in your role. It's going to make you work smarter and not harder. And I assure you, my office was like walking back to like probably 1980, maybe even the 70s, but it was extremely antiquated. And once again, I had 4 years to stew on this and recognize all of the changes that need to be made.
It really resonated with, thank you very much, Kim. What really resonated with me too is the fact that you've got the logical, like, of course, 1 + 2 = 3, but there's also the emotional component. And this is not a news flash, but like those don't always like align, right? They go, oh, of course that change is going to be good. Because yeah, you're right. There could be things that cloud their ability to judge that. And so what I heard, and just what bears repeating, is involving some of those folks in terms of being part of the solution, not just impacted by the solution, seems to be really, really important to me in terms of like what's resonating. I think that's great. Shelley, what would you add?
What I would add is that in my experience, it's not been necessarily fearing change, but getting people to move past the fact that if we're changing, it doesn't mean that it reflects poorly on them, that they did something wrong in the past. What it really just means is that there's a different way to do it moving forward, and that there'll be an improvement, and that maybe the way we were doing it in the past wasn't sustainable or it was causing issues for other departments. The approach we're taking on our debt, for example, at the UG, is to make it more sustainable. The practice that we had in the past was costing us more money the way we were designing our bond issues. And then the amount of debt kept increasing. And so we're looking at this year, we actually took a debt pause, which that is very difficult when you have a lot of infrastructure needs, which is what you use debt for. And the elected officials have really championed it, but it's been a little bit difficult because the staff has felt like they were following direction and that it wasn't, I guess, their fault that we had found ourselves in a position. And it wasn't really anybody's fault. It was just we were trying to meet capital needs, but it's not sustainable with our financial condition. And so just bringing some new ideas, as the others were saying, getting the employees involved in the options. But I think there's two things with that. One is that you've got to make sure it's clear that you are going to move forward and we are going to change. And so it's not that that's negotiable. That's not negotiable. But the why, I think if you tell people why you're changing, and the different solutions and the why, the pros and cons for each of those, it helps to generate buy-in to those solutions. And so I will say that is definitely a part of what I've been challenged with as a leader. Like the other person said, was looking at the Covey quadrants, and I'm very much about situational leadership, where you have to look at the people that are in leadership roles, and you have to figure out, do they have the willingness to change? Do they have the ability to change? So it's all about the willingness and ability. And so if you just kind of put those filters on as you're working with your team, I think that helps you to strategize. One size does not fit all. And so you've got to think differently with different people as to how you can get them to embrace change. I also think it's really important that you find opportunities to praise people and to praise them publicly. I know, for example, many times when I was talking in public meetings, which in this community are broadcast, and there are an awful lot of people that watch those. And I make a point to say and praise the past practices of what our staff had done and all the important things that were getting addressed. But then also acknowledging that we have to make sure we have a sustainable solution. And so a nod to the policy direction that our commission wants to go and finding a balance there, meeting our capital needs with making sure we can afford them.
Yeah, very well said. I think, and both Kim and Shelley both mentioned this. I mean, there's an importance for folks to bring people in, make them feel included, get their input. I think the key item is allow them to feel heard more than anything else. And then you can use that input. And then at the end of the day, you as a leader have the responsibility to make the call at the end of the day. Kim, I think I want to finish this topic with you.
Sure.
You've been very active, especially in your first couple of years in office. In that process, how have you defined success? When you have these efficiency opportunities, what is success? And I'm sure that varies from time to time.
Okay, so I think success is kind of a twofold question. And if I'm being honest, I really want to be valued versus successful, because I think value lasts longer than success. And so I think success as a leader in my position is I don't want to be the only one that's successful. We all win. We all win or we all fail, right? Because we're all doing the work. And so that is something that I equip my team with is, just really wanting them to be the best, whatever role they are in, whether it's an accounting supervisor, a treasurer service specialist, the person that's answering the phones, they're going to be the best person answering that phone every single day. And so if they are happy, whether this is their end all be all job and they retire from my office, or if it's a stepping stone for them to broaden their career, that's something that I fully support. And I'm glad I get to be a small role in their success. And so for me, the spotlight isn't on me. I think, a leader truly brings up everybody and it's just not about me. And so that's kind of what success means to me. Is everybody winning? Is everybody contributing? Are we all in this together in a team effort? Because, the whole one bad apple can spoil the bunch. If you have one person that is not on board to do this, it's going to kind of anchor that ship down. So that's kind of what success means to me is, once again, I really don't like to use the term success. I really like to use the term value, because I think value lasts a lot longer than success.
That's great. And what I'm hearing too, I think it's good to kind of wrap up our second topic of actually like getting the motion going on these initiatives is it's not just one path to getting folks to champion it. They're not going to just sort of see the Excel table and go, oh, well, of course we should do that. There's the sort of the value for the agency or the department. There's the value obviously for your constituents. And then there's the value for your teammates. And like, and to get past like what Shelley was talking about, get past this is how we've always done it. Well, let me open up the world of opportunity for you. Like you were saying, Kim, to show like, here's how this is all going to be better.
Yes.
With these initiatives.
Yes.
That's all. That's great. Thank you very much for those comments and the input. And I want to make sure we get to our third topic. To Chelsea, we're going to go over to you. And so we've talked about identifying these opportunities. We talked about really championing those opportunities and, getting the teammates excited about it, getting the sort of the broader leadership and the constituency excited about it. Now the real work's got to get done. We got to go out and execute. So the question, like, what are some ways in which you find important to measure progress, or how you show that this is working or we're learning from those initiatives?
A great question. So I'm a big data-driven, I'm a self-declared nerd, and I love data. You can get lost in it. And so I do try to check my data with other people, like I said earlier, and see what else is important to them. The phrase that comes to mind when you ask the question is what gets measured gets managed. And so I ask people what they want to measure. It's really important in these projects that even if it seems small, that you have some measurement that you can look back at and see how your decision impacted the progress there. So, I mean, for example, if you're measuring digital adoption, did you also measure manual payments at the same time? So, when I first started, my office was on the first floor, right in the utility cashier's office, and I got to observe all of their different payment channels and streams. And so when you start going after the work, it was really important to me to put measurements and wrap reports around what we're doing today. And then as we took steps, we looked through those together to see how our work impacted those measurements. I would also add that it's easy to get distracted. Kudos to the people that are on the webinar today because they care. They've taken a step forward and getting the work done. But you got to find a way to stay focused. We all have competing priorities, and in politics, sometimes it changes with the day of the week. And so you have to find a way to get back to those top measurements and find kind of your North Star or the end goal. And then maybe do like a quarterly look back or something that can help you look back at those. And then when you're feeling down and you feel like, man, I've had really busy week or a busy year, you can look back and see the measurement through that data and say, okay, I've moved the needle and I've inched towards that measurement of success.
At the end of the day, back to the definition of efficiency, it's the level of inputs to get the output and maximizing those outputs. And so whether it's time spent by your staff or time spent by your constituents or your taxpayers, something is an input to get
Right.
to the output, and being able to your point, measure that. And what really resonates with me, Chelsea, that I think is maybe something that is easy to get lost or to be distracted by, is setting yourself that rigor to say, okay, I'm going to come back to this
Right.
on a regular basis. I'm sure you've seen it. I've seen it. It's easy to start stuff,
Right.
but it takes discipline to come back. And my recommendation is even just set a calendar reminder. Like, I'm going to spend an hour, a quarter to come back and just pull this information, and we have a log.
And sometimes it takes that. I mean, I have self-set things on my calendar, and sometimes it takes that to say, okay, I can't get this done in the normal course of my day, but if it's on my calendar, I can say this is the time I've set aside to work on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That way it just keeps moving forward a little bit. I will also caution the attendees that one of the lessons that I found coming to public service from private finance was it's not always about cost. It seems like people that you work with sometimes get lost in, well, what's the return on investment in the private world? And then in government, they're afraid to spend any money as an input. And it was a stark difference. And so that came to mind when you were talking about the inputs and the outputs. You don't spend 3 cents to save a penny.
Yes. The other part that I learned this when we've got a long time client up in Michigan too. And they talked about we'll talk about inputs, right? And measuring that and measuring the impact. I think sometimes back to Kim's point about fear of that change, what's going to happen to me, and efficiency. It's like, well, we want less input to get to the same output, or more output for the same, we get that. But the fear is like, well, okay, what are we going to do? Does that mean we're going to have less resources? And so again, back to a great partner and client up in Michigan, they're like, no, we could use our resources and our people to go do other higher value work. They upskilled. They spent more time on those complex situations or interactions with their constituents that weren't able to be afforded that time. And
We run into that. I've seen it.
So it's good. I think it's good. It bears repeating to our audience today. When we think about measuring and managing that impact, it's like, well, then you just can maximize the impact, overall impact, the output of your resources by finding those opportunities for efficiency.
And then I would say that when it comes to getting the work done, your peers are some of your biggest cheerleaders. You look across the organization and you've got, if you need that kind of motivation, it doesn't have to just be you, because sometimes they've been waiting for somebody to just do the work and just get it done. And oh man, it's just not been within my wheelhouse to do this. And so you'd be surprised where you can get ideas to actually start working. And once you start, it's kind of addicting to say, hey, look back. And I love progress. It's in my DNA and in my blood.
Yep, that's fantastic. Well, so I'll ask one follow-up question. And this is around, okay, so we're measuring progress. Sometimes progress doesn't get made. I think we should address that too. It would be great if everyone attending this webinar and everything they did was going to be a wild success. I hope that that's the case.
Right.
If in the event that it's not the case and you're measuring the success, what's the advice that you'd provide to those folks too, in terms of, a failure is just a learning. How do you tackle that?
It's hard. You take it personal when you're brand new and you want to show progress, but it's not personal. It's an opportunity for everybody to learn and share ideas. I think if you set the tone in the beginning, that's an expectation with every Pay It project we did. We do a lessons learned and we go through and talk through all of the team and we set that tone at the top and the expectation in the beginning that this is not a session to point fingers and lay blame, and it is just our opportunity to learn. And then once you go back and you do a new project and you incorporate that, you over communicate that. And it's not to brag, but it's to indicate that we take this seriously and learning is part of our culture. Even if it's a citizen initiative, I thank them for the opportunity to learn from that. And I think that means a lot to people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know we talk about launching and iterating, and that's a feedback loop. And that's a constant evolution versus just a big flashbang and then all of a sudden, high fives and cupcakes. Dr. Shelley or Kim, any additional comments in terms of measuring or managing the sort of actual execution here? Kim, I'll go to you.
So I think one kind of piece that no one has really hit on that I know is big for me, once again, as I stated earlier, I do live in an older community. They kind of fear change because this is the way it's always been done. And so I think just really educating your constituents on the wins of the change. For example, I implemented what's called a lockbox. If you're not familiar, basically lockbox is a processing center where all of those payments are sent to and then deposited immediately into the bank. And so I think really sharing that, hey, because I implemented lockbox, I earned $1 million more in interest because I was able to get that in the bank faster and for a longer duration of time so that they can then see the value behind that change, right? If they can tie it to a value, then they're okay with spending taxpayer money because anyone who their salaries are paid by taxpayers, they think they own you. They think, well, you work for me and I pay your salary and quit wasting taxpayer money on these stupid services. But then if you tie it back to an actual value and a result, then they're like, oh, okay, well, this is a positive thing then. And it's like, yes, this is a positive thing. And so I think just really sharing those wins with your constituents, whether it be in a newsletter, if your county has or your organization has like a Facebook or anything like that, sharing those wins on social media or through, like I said, a newsletter. Every year I put in a newsletter in my tax statements that go out to over 100,000 parcels of just data and things that they can reference to. Once again, sharing those wins. I think education helps change. If they kind of know what's coming versus a just boom, this is a change and deal with it. But if you kind of slowly put your foot in the water and let them warm up to it, then they're okay with it. But I know for me, in my situation, in the county that I live in, they really, really, really fear change. We're still working on it every day, but I think everyone has gotten a lot better. But I think sharing those wins to tie it to the value of this is the decision I made, this is the change that I made, and this was the positive outcome is really going to go a long way.
Yeah, that very well said. Thank you, Kim. And it reminds me, there was a treasurer in South Carolina that had mentioned something similar. So very relatable, finding the relatable data points. And she had said, at least from work that we did with her in terms of like time to revenue and time to collection, compressing that, she was like, that was the equivalent, like doing that work was the equivalent of not needing to raise property taxes by 10%. I'm misstating that, but sort of directionally. And folks go, oh,
right.
That's great. Thanks a lot. Good work.
Right. Because people don't know what we do. They really don't understand what it is that we do on a daily basis. So if you kind of just give them that sort of long-winded explanation, they're able to just grasp it a lot better. Because I have had countless conversations with constituents, in a tizzy of, why am I sending my property tax payment to a PO box in Salt Lake City? And this is a waste of time. This is wasting of taxpayer dollars. But when I really, really give that long-winded explanation, they're like, oh, okay. Because once again, they don't understand really to the core of what we do. And so what I always try to preface is like when I'm making social media posts about, a change or whatever, I always just kind of at the end, I always just say, thank you for putting your trust in me, because that is what they have done. They put their trust in me and I want them to know that I value their input. And I also value the fact that they did put their trust in me to do the right thing. And that's why I'm huge on transparency and I'm going to hold their hand every step of the way through these changes that they're quite frankly not used to.
That's a great service that you provide. Shelley, final comment here before we move to our lightning round.
Yeah, I think it's just recognizing that there's not one solution to problems. And sometimes it's a lot of small changes and small solutions. But like the others have said, measuring the outcomes. We will do pilot programs often, and we specifically say they're a pilot because if it's successful, great. But if it's not, it's okay. And we're going to stop doing that and try something else. I mentioned our situation with DMV, and we're opening a small pilot program in another community in our county, their city hall, to handle just the vehicle renewals, the tag renewals, which is a quick transaction. So we're going to see how that goes. But I will also say, with that solution, we're also partnering with Pay It. One of the great things that we're doing is partnering our marketing teams. And we also have an older community. And so there's probably 40% of the people that could renew their tags online are still going in person. And we have 2 locations, soon to have 3. And how that process works is the state will then mail out the stickers that go on the license plate. And so with Payet's partnership, we have inserts going into those mailings with people's stickers to say, hey, did you know that you can do this online next year and not have to come in, and you can avoid the lines and avoid the crowds? So getting creative about how we communicate, but I do love the addition of being able to say, and here's the thing is that that will help us be more efficient. We might save money, we might save time. Time is what's critical. And so I appreciate that little extra of saying, well, yeah, we made the change and we're trying to improve customers, but say more. Like, how are we going to measure that? Are we going to look and see, do we want to move the needle from 40% of people that could do online that come in person down to 30%, or what's our goal? And so it's important to know, though, that you can take a lot of smaller changes in order to really effectuate change and address a problem that you have. So that would be my commentary.
Perfect. And I'm going to keep you on, Shelley. It's our lightning round. So this is the last bit, like our lasting advice. What is one piece of advice for each of you to give on any sort of pitfall to avoid? Watch out for X, or just be cautious around Y. What advice would you give?
Yeah, I would say the advice I would give is be very careful if you have had other experiences to sparingly use well, at this organization, we did it this way, or at that organization, we did it that way. Instead, find different ways to provide. Have you guys ever looked at this or that? Where your knowledge comes from isn't really as important. It kind of pits, I think, you against other people, particularly long-term employees. So I think it's just important to say, we're trying to brainstorm all the solutions. Maybe I read about something, if I read about it, or I have worked somewhere where we did it this way. What do you think about that? So it's just trying to solicit input when you've had exposure to new ideas, or not necessarily new ideas, but different ways of doing it. So I would say that would be one of the pitfalls I would try to avoid.
Very helpful. Very helpful. Chelsea, let's go to you.
Okay, my gotcha is it's hard to pick just one, but I think the one that I use most frequently is not. Sorry, let me start that over. The one I use most frequently is that you don't want to get so far into the weeds that you're chasing a little return, because you may start with a topic that's really big and really impactful, and I am a carrot chaser and I want to see it to the end, and I want this project or this piece completely done. And by the end, the tail is so infinitely small of people that you're impacting. You've already made the mass impact, and instead of just closing it at that, you want to just capture the last couple of people. And so it's not that they're not important, but then at that point, you're being inefficient by chasing the last few instead of moving on to the next piece.
Very good advice. Yeah, to sort of know when to move to the next
When to
thing.
call it.
Yeah, great. Kim, we'll finish with you.
So I think mine differs a little bit from theirs. Just being on the government side, I would just, just as far as a pitfall, make sure that, you're following your government's or your company's RFP process, if there is one, your procurement process in a nutshell, just making sure that you're following all those guidelines and things like that. And this is sort of off subject and it may not answer the question, but what I would encourage everyone to do is whatever vendor you are looking for, whether it be payment solutions, streamlining processes, whatever that is look for a vendor that wants to grow and build with your organization just as much as you do. Someone who sees your vision and maybe has ideas to grow that even bigger, and just building that relationship. They're not just a vendor. You're not just a number. You're not just a contract. You are a relationship. It is a relationship. You have somebody that you can call when you have a question. It's not just this 800 number customer service or a customer service at email address that you submit a ticket. And so, because those can become pitfalls, you get into a vendor and then they just disappear after they get that contract signed. So that is going to be my cautionary or even suggestion when you are looking at change and efficiencies.
Yeah, that could introduce new inefficiencies too. So I couldn't say thank you enough to our three panelists. So Shelley, Chelsea, Kim, thank you very much. I mean, I could say thank you, but I think the real impact is going to be in all the folks that are watching this webinar live, those that are watching a recording are going to go back and make a difference in their communities because of something you said and then my gibberish between your comments. But the things that you said are going to be the things that really pay the dividends. And I think the big part is this is not just about being stewards of funds, but it's about being stewards of people that serve people and using those funds that also serve people at the end of the day. So really good people working with good people for a good cause are going to constantly find ways to get more with less with the resources that they have. I'm hopeful that that's what we got out of today. Just a quick recap to close it up. And we talked about finding those opportunities, going through it, looking at those with your own eyes, looking at the data, asking, listening, doing a lot of understanding. And maybe you're working in it right now and you're going to go run for office and you're going to go make those changes too, or you're going to be called on, talking to Shelley and Chelsea. I mean, they've gotten calls like, hey, I need help because I've got a problem over here. I know you've solved this problem before. And so every day you're going to find those opportunities for efficiencies to advance them and then championing those results, championing those efforts, prioritizing the right ones, talking not about just the logic of it, but the people behind it, the people impacted by it. And it's not to address the fear and change that fear from fear to excitement. I heard that. That was great. And then measuring the results, putting those reminders to go invest the few moments to check in and make sure you've got a path. If it's going great, great. Keep it moving. Why is it moving? And if it's not, pivot, you iterate. We talk about learning quickly and continuing to listen and making those adjustments. And at the end of the day, I think if we all do all those things, we're going to be in a really, really good space. Ladies, thank you very much. I want to say for those that are here, we're going to have a giveaway. And so with that, again, thank you very much. We're always here to talk. And if you've got questions, continue to submit them. We'll make sure to get them back to you. We're excited to get your questions and continue these conversations around ways that we can drive more and more efficiency in our government agencies around the world.